My name is Gary Bankhead and I'm an underwater archaeologist who works on Sky History's TV show River Hunters alongside fellow presenters Rick Edwards and Bowie Met. I'm here in Yorkshire to take you on a behind the scenes journey which explains just how and why we came back to this beautiful county to film a season 3 episode of River Hunters which features the largest and bloodiest battle ever fought on British soil. The Battle of Towton. The battle was one of a series of bloody conflicts fought for the English throne between two rival households of the Plantagenet royal family, the House of Lancaster and the House of York. I'll take you to the sites that we recce'd and the locations where we filmed, and I'll set out the rationale of why we searched where we did and also explain how our decision to do so was based upon the results of archaeological investigations, historical and topographical studies, but also the contemporary accounts from that time. For me, being part of the production team that actually researched the Battle of Towton, how it came to be and why, and then to be given the opportunity to search the rivers that skirt the Towton Battlefield was a really truly remarkable experience. But to fully share that experience with you, we really need to understand the historical context in which the battle was fought, and to be aware of the incredible sequence of events which took place in the lead up to the battle itself. And we should know more about the belligerents, about the commanders and the leaders, and indeed the soldiers that fought to the death on that snow-swept field in Yorkshire 560 years ago. So I can't come back to York without coming down to the water's edge to reminisce about a season 2 episode of River Hunters that we filmed called Viking Invasion. And if you saw the programme, you'll remember how I had an opportunity to put my full dive kit on and enter the river just there. On the day it was really hard, the conditions were quite awful, and that's because the peat just filtered out all of the sunlight, so it was really dark on the riverbed, and it was very difficult for me to get down into any form of archaeology. But ultimately I did. At the end of 3 long dives I was able to come up with a bag full of pottery shards, and those were actually dated right away back to that late medieval period. I think I found a fragment of floor tile. So to find objects on the riverbed here that effectively went from every century from the 14th through to modern day was incredible, and it made it all worthwhile. Ask us if I would go back in there again. Well, maybe. On the 30th of December 1460, Richard, Duke of York, was here at his own fortress of Sandal Castle, which is positioned just on the outskirts of Wakefield. He'd already sent word to his oldest son, Edward, the Earl of March and future King of England, to send reinforcements. However, before they arrived, a Lancastrian force was dispatched here from Pontefract Castle, which is some 9 miles away. Now that force was under the command of John Clifford, who was the 9th Baron Clifford, John Neville, who was Baron Neville, Henry Percy, who was the 3rd Earl of Northumberland, Henry Beaufort, who was the 3rd Duke of Somerset, and also Sir Andrew Trollope, a professional soldier and also a veteran of the 100-Year War. He was actually on the side of the Yorkists, but defected after the confrontation at Ludford Bridge. Now the reason I mention those individuals specifically is because they each feature at Towton just a few months later. However, unbeknown to York, additional Lancastrians under the command of James Butler, the 1st Earl of Wiltshire, hid in nearby woodland. and perhaps preferring to fight rather than withstand a siege, York marched out of Sandal Castle, down Many Gates Lane, to engage a force that he perceived was no greater than his own. Now the trap was very quickly sprung, and the Yorkist army, York himself, and many nobles were quickly surrounded and slain. York's brother-in-law, Richard Neville, the 5th Earl of Salisbury, he escaped, but he was later caught and beheaded. Now the battle itself is remembered for the mnemonic that we use to remember the colours of the rainbow. It's Richard of York gave battle in vain. And now I've told you that, you remember it, won't you? York's second son, Edmund, the Earl of Rutland, attempted to escape with his tutor, but he was caught and killed just over a mile away at the strategically important Wakefield Bridge. Contemporary chroniclers personally attribute the slaying of young Edmund to the Lancastrian Clifford. And given that it was usual for captured noblemen to be ransomed, it's just possible that Clifford murdered the young 17-year-old in revenge for the death of his own father at the hands of the Yorkists at the First Battle of St. Albans. On hearing the news of his brother's death, Edward was infuriated and vowed vengeance. Afterwards, Clifford was given the nickname Butcher Clifford.
This incredible structure is Wakefield Bridge, which spans the River Calder. We know that it was built during the mid-14th century. Now, given we are about a mile away from Sandal Castle, plus the fact that young Edmund was murdered very close to this spot, also those Lancastrians who marched from Pontefract Castle to engage with York would have crossed at this spot. It really does have some history, and I can't wait to share that with you. So let's go and have a look.
The bridge has 9 semi-pointed arches separated by pointed cutwaters, which in turn stand on platform bases. And we know that it was built between the early to mid 14th century, so it really does have some age about it. Now the history of the bridge is actually really well documented, and we know that it was widened on the upstream side by 9 feet. First of all in 1758, and then again in 1797. Now halfway across the bridge, and built into the stonework of the bridge, which you might just make out there, is the chapel of St. Mary the Virgin. And although this is an 1848 reconstruction, the original structure was built in 1350 as a chantry chapel, allowing travellers to pause and pray for a safe journey. The chapel was used for worship right up until the Reformation. And it's actually only one of 4 such structures surviving. If I just cross over the river here and get to this platform base next to our pointed cutwater, just turn round and show you the river itself, because this was actually considered as one of the locations where the River Hunters team could come and search. And I just know that both Bo and Rick would have loved to get in here and help find some objects. Given that a bridge would have been at this spot throughout the medieval period, and we have such a late and post-medieval period history. So the potential for finding objects in the water here was huge. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop the camera down just so you can have a look, and hopefully we can spot something.
So this is the object I've literally just found lying there on the riverbed. A piece of costume jewellery in the form of a bracelet. It's got 4 square cut paste gems at the top, perhaps originally emeralds or alluding to be emeralds. So for me, this is a really interesting object because it offers up an explanation as to how objects ended up in the river in the first place. And this just has to be accidental loss. And that's why searching rivers adjacent to bridges is really exciting. And I just hope we get an opportunity for the River Hunters team to come back to this spot. We've been here, we've done the recce. It could have featured in that episode of Towton, but at the end of the day, it was just too far from the battlefield itself, over 20 miles. Close enough to Sandal Castle, but not close enough to tell the story of the Battle of Towton. Fingers crossed we get an opportunity to come back here, and I'm just pretty sure that both Bo and Rick will absolutely love this location.
On the 2nd or the 3rd of February 1461, Edward defeated the Lancastrian army at Mortimer's Cross near Kingsland in Hertfordshire, before advancing to London where he is elected king. On the 16th of February 1461, Margaret of Anjou, who is now in charge of the Lancastrian army, captures Dunstable before using the cover of darkness to outflank defensive Yorkist positions and capture St Albans. Realising that he's been outmanoeuvred, Warwick orders a tactical withdrawal to Chipping Norton in Oxfordshire, but he leaves behind Henry VI. So the scene is now set for the bloodiest and largest battle of the Wars of the Roses and its precursor at Ferry Bridge.
So we've now come into the grounds of All Saints Church in the quite picturesque village of Saxton in North Yorkshire, because I want to show you 2 really special landmarks. Firstly, this is the tomb of Lord Dacre, a Lancastrian knight who fought at Towton. It's the only visible trace of the battle today. Accounts from the battle describe him as removing his helmet to take a drink when he is struck in the neck by an arrow. The badly worn abbreviated Latin text inscription reads, "Here lies Randolph, Lord of Dacre and Gilsland, a true knight, valiant in battle in service of King Henry VI, who died on Palm Sunday, 29th of March 1461, on whose soul may God have mercy. Amen." And secondly, this pyramid-shaped stone monument engraved with images of the battle, which was designed by renowned sculptor Steve Hines. It stands on top of a mass grave of some 69 bodies. In 1996, construction workers at Towton Hall uncovered a previously unrecorded mass grave containing approximately 25 individuals. Archaeological excavations of an adjacent area revealed a continuation of the grave containing the human remains of a further 43 individuals. During the time of the battle, a wide range of close combat weapons would have been used, from swords and daggers and knives to blunt hand weapons such as clubs and maces, flails and warhammers. The warhammers often had a spike on one side of the head, and it is thought that these weapons were the ones used to kill many of those buried here. Apart from the longbow, another type of weapon used at Towton were polearms, another close combat weapon. The main fighting part of the weapon was placed on top of a long shaft of wood, and these include spears, lances, Danish axes, halberds and pole axes. The pole allowed an extended reach or an increase in angular momentum. Polearms were relatively simple to make and very easy to use, and they were often derived from either hunting or agricultural tools. So I finally arrived at the site of the Battle of Towton. It's a cold, bitterly cold winter's day and the snow is starting to fall. I'm standing at the edge of a plateau of relatively flat, open, arable farmland that probably looked very similar during that mid-15th century. To put this location of this landscape into a form of context, it's perhaps useful to appreciate where we are. So the village of Towton is located some 2 miles away to the north. Half a mile to the south is the village of Saxton, with its church tower standing proud. 9 miles beyond Saxton, you may make out the 3 cooling towers of Ferrybridge Power Station, which stands adjacent to that late medieval bridge and site of a skirmish where perhaps 3,000 men died. Once makeshift repairs had been done to that bridge, the main Yorkist army was able to cross the River Aire and travel north to Saxton, where they formed up in their 2 battles on the downward slope of the plateau. The main Lancastrian army were already here, formed up in their 2 battles. King Henry, Margaret of Anjou and their son, the Prince of Wales, were safe in York some 20 miles to the north. So this is an area I want to explore a little bit more and just try to explain the sequence of events that happened next. So let's go and have a look. Research occasioned as part of the Towton Battlefield Archaeological Survey project has identified a large number of small finds clustered in this general location. And apart from the many arrowheads, these objects appear to be the personal possessions of the men who fought here. Decorative mounts, buckles, dagger chips, etc. Objects presumably lost in the heat of battle. And for me, this new archaeological evidence is really important because it confirms the exact location where the 2 huge armies clashed on the slopes leading up to the plateau at Towton. So the Lancastrian army were already here up on the plateau. The right flank was commanded by Lord Dacre, the centre by Henry Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, and the left by Sir Andrew Trollope. The Yorkists lined up with young 18-year-old Edward on the left flank, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, in the centre, and the varward being led by Baron Fauconberg. It is then said that Edward ordered his army to give the enemy, whether nobleman or commoner, no quarter. Edward Hall, the contemporary chronicler, describes that first phase of the battle, and essentially what he's talking about is a Yorkist arrow storm. The problem for the Lancastrians is that they were facing south, looking into both the wind and the snow, and they were unaware that their arrows were falling short. Eventually they had to abandon the high ground, and a bitter hand-to-hand struggle took place, and that lasted throughout most of the day. And it wasn't until reinforcements arrived with John Mowbray, the Earl of Norfolk, that the Lancastrian left flank was forced back. And eventually the Lancastrian army pivoted on this north-south axis, and then suddenly the steep escarpment and the Cock Beck were behind them, and that is when the rout began. So I'm standing on the top of what today is called the Bloody Meadow. But for me, this really is a prehistoric landscape. Just over there are medieval ridge and furrow lynchets, and 6 miles beyond at Barwick-in-Elmet is this huge Iron Age hill fort. The Cock Beck just meanders for some 4 miles towards Tadcaster. At the bottom of the plateau, we have the steep escarpment, and the potential to find objects from the battle in the colluvium is absolutely huge.
So if we return to the accounts of the battle, it's just probable that when that rout began, those fleeing Lancastrian soldiers would have been channeled down this valley. Or, at some point, they would have had to scramble down that steep escarpment if they were going to make good their escape. So what I want to do now is just reenact that run down to the Cock Beck and just get a sense of how terrifying those final few moments would have been in the lives of those Lancastrian soldiers. Oh, hey, right, let's go. Let's run down the hill. Hey, this is really steep. Don't want to trip over the molehills. Can't really go fast. So if you imagine you've been fighting on Towton Battlefield all day, probably haven't been fed, you're probably dehydrated, freezing cold, but the adrenaline's still running. You're running down here carrying something, whether it's a sword, a dagger, a helmet, a poleaxe, polearm, and you know if you get down to the bottom and cross this river, but suddenly it's got really deep, you're ploughing through mud and marsh, and it's not easy going. You're trying to push reeds out the way. Your colleagues, your fellow Lancastrians behind you are tripping over and you're stumbling. And instead of arriving at a river that is so shallow, it's not. The Cock Beck is swollen with rain, snowfall. You're stuck in the mud and the marsh. Lancastrians, Yorkers are charging you down. And if you fall here, you will die. Look what I found.
Don't actually know how far the other group are. I think they're estimated half a mile bit. Yeah. A river like this.
So just 3 miles north of the Towton Battlefield is the small town of Tadcaster. Over my shoulder you may make out, or should make out, the River Wharfe. And you just imagine if you were a fleeing Lancastrian soldier, you had to cross this river. And given that it was late winter, its chances of being swollen 3 or 4 meters deeper than what it is today, you know, a real problem for those men desperate to get across. And we do know that the bridge itself, the medieval bridge that was positioned where the relatively modern bridge is, was a major obstacle, and many Lancastrians were caught and killed at this site as well. So this location is actually of interest to the river hunters anyway. We've got a 15th century church there. Immediately behind it we have a mound from a castle which is dated to the 11th century, and we think that based on archaeological evidence that there was a Roman fort at that site as well. Now, like any good Roman, built a fort near a bridge, near a river, they would build a bridge or there would be a fort. So this area here for me is really interesting, very searchable. So what I'm going to do is take the camera down and just have a look at the conditions in the river and just see what it's like. There we go. Drop the camera down. hopefully you could see that that was relatively clear. Very, very good searching conditions. I like to get my head down in the water with my mask on so I can see the very small finds. I can clearly see Victorian pottery here. It's ideal location. Get some cut-proof gloves on, get some really good signals in this location, and who knows, we might find objects that just tell us a little bit more about the history of Tadcaster. If we can find something associated with that battle in that late 15th century, it'll be incredible. So, but you never know. If you aren't in the river, if you're not looking for objects, you're never going to find them. So there we go. So that's the end of this recce. I'm going to report back to the team and recommend a few locations where we can search. Two contrasting rivers, the Cock Beck look very about thigh deep, slightly cloudy, a lot of mud there, so that'll be really challenging. Steep banks as well for access and entry, going to be really difficult. And imagine there's a swarm of biting insects down there too. But this is very tranquil, and providing we don't get any rainfall, a really good location. So that's it for the recce for the Towton Battle episode of River Hunters. The next one I'm going to go up to Scotland, and I got a couple of really exciting sites to search up there to do the recce. So let's see what that yields. And so that's it from North Yorkshire. I'll catch up with you soon.
Oh, big beautiful Roman coin in it. There's a talkie?
It's just a video. I'll get a still from it. I can't work out the camera.
Do you want me to stop?